great controversy where it is said that whenever the final two things that happen in this nation, when we're in the final moments, are that when Rome succeeds in bringing a Sunday law, causing people to demand a Sunday law, and to support their institutions. So this is a fulfillment of prophecy as well. And of course, the Second Amendment thing, that's a different question. I'm not going to get into that. But yesterday, the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Now, I particularly am someone that is very pro-life. And I think that one of the reasons why God is allowing this to be agitated right now, one of the principles in Scripture that I have seen over and over again is that God allows things to be agitated to make people think. And what is there in God's law that we need to think about with regard to Roe v. Wade? Thou shalt not kill. Are we going to pay attention to God's law or not? Now, the ramifications of that are still to be understood. I saw the news before sundown last night. I didn't check anything today, so I don't know if we had riots last night. We may have. Probably did. But in any event, we are moving rapidly into the future where God has promised that he is going to bring it all to conclusion. But, yes. Yeah, Bud says, what he says about that is, praise the Lord, that means Jesus is coming soon. And we're very happy about that. But I want to begin this is our last study in the book of Genesis. And I really have enjoyed into the book of Genesis. I hope you all have as well. And there's a lot more that we have not been able to get to. But we're going to be in starting in chapter 46. But I just want to give a little preliminary here as we get into this study. Remember, we actually had last week where the 12 brothers have to go back and they have to tell their father that Joseph is still alive. Now, can you imagine as they're getting closer and closer home, says, how are we going to do this? How are we going to tell our father that we lied to him and what they were trying to do? And I want you to stop and think about what was really happening there. It just dawned on me as I studied this week. All of his brothers resented the two dreams he had, remember? The dreams were the actual sheaves bowing down to him and the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down, Joseph being the preeminent one. Now, what was there in the family dynamic that caused that to be such a threat? Well, it was very clear. Reuben was the firstborn of Leah, who was not the favorite wife. But Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, who was the favorite wife, and was supposed to be the original wife. So it was very likely that the birthright, the head of the family role, was going to pass to Joseph instead of to Reuben. And all the older brothers resented that. And they had enough knowledge about the dreams and realized the dreams might have significance that they were trying to make sure that that never happened. When they sold Joseph to the traders, they wanted to make sure it was not going to happen. And look how God overruled in that. But now, years later, many years later, I think it's about 22 years, I believe, is what we're at. And I need to have someone help me close this door over here, if you can do that for me so we can cut down. Buzz, thank you. And now they have to tell their father that Joseph is still alive. I can only imagine, as the family gathered around in that moment, what that meeting had to be like. And we find that he finally gets over his shock. In fact, he was so taken back that it was like he fainted and didn't have any energy left in him. And he couldn't believe it. Then he settled down and said, okay, my son is still alive. And he decides that he will go to Egypt. Now, I want you to stop and think, before we jump into chapter 46, how big a deal is it that he's going to leave the promised land that has been promised to them through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and actually leave that land and go to Egypt? Well, number one, he has dreams and visions along the way. Remember, he had the dream of the ladder going all the way to heaven and back, angels up and down on it. When he comes back, he actually wrestles with the pre-incarnate Christ all night. He's wrestling with him all night. So that I can only imagine Jacob thinking, okay, what can I do? Buzz. Well, that's right. And that's the point that I want to make as we read the first few verses of chapter 46. I want to look at that very point. So I need a reader, and I want to start with actually chapter 45, verse 28, and I want to read down through verse 4. So I need a reader. Who's going to volunteer for me? Delane, go ahead. If you'll read 28 through 4.
Then Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions the night, and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." So he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes."
Okay. Now, here's something interesting. Where is Beersheba geographically in relationship to the land of Israel? Want to know where that is? Want to talk about where that is? It's at the very southern edge. They would always say from Dan to Beersheba to talk about the two farthest extremes. Dan was in the north, Beersheba was in the south. So as he's getting ready on his way to Egypt to pass out of the land of Canaan, the promised land, where he has been sent and the promise has been made, he's the third generation into that. As he is there, he stops at the edge to sacrifice to his God. In other words, I see in that a sense of, God, I need to know you're leading me. And what does God do? God comes to him in a vision and says, don't be afraid, go ahead. And what he's saying is, you're going to go down and Joseph is going to close your eyes when you die. You know, that was a common thing. When somebody died, there would be someone in the family that would actually put their hand over their eyes and close their eyes. That's what God is saying. Joseph is going to close your eyes. In other words, you're going to die there, but I'm going to make a great nation out of you while you're there, and you're still going to be coming. They're going to be coming back. That's right. That's right. He knew he would be coming back. He knew that his descendants would be coming back. But you know, it must have been something, because don't we all like to think in terms of God working out his will in our lifetimes? Think about what it means to say, okay, God, I know you're working with me right now, but down the road 2 or 3 generations, you'll be working in a different way. You know, I just can imagine the mindset that was going on. But here's the key thing. He is following God's lead. He's following God's lead. He has learned to do that and not try to do it himself. I think that's one reason why he stopped to sacrifice. He had deceived his brother Esau, trying to take things into his own hands. Now he wants to go see Joseph, but he needs a little reassurance. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, and I need to get back over to the right place here. So as they go, here's what's interesting. We find in the rest of this chapter, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we have a listing of all the people that are with him. And it's very intriguing that as he lists his sons, their wives and their children, his daughter and her husband and the children, they come down to the end, and if you get to verses 26 and 27, you'll notice an interesting thing. The numbers here are fascinating. Verse 26, I'll just read this. All the persons who went with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. The sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob in Egypt were 70. Okay? What do you think the symbol is that there are 70 people that go down into Egypt? Okay, 70 is a number that has significance, and in our lesson is pointing out that the very fact that that's mentioned is talking about the spiritual destiny of this people. Now just stop and think. A little while later, as they're coming out, several hundred years down the line, we know that there were about 2 million people that came out. 2 million people came out of that country. So were they blessed? Were they fruitful and multiplying? They were. 500,000 men plus women and children. That's how they get to the number of 2 million coming out in the Exodus. It's also interesting to look. I want to look on as they're coming, as they're traveling. Verse 28. I want you to read first. Somebody read first 28 and 29 and 30. Who will read those 3 verses for me? All right. I'm going to. Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Dorothy.
28 through 30?
Yes.
Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph, to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive."
Okay. Can you imagine the pathos of that meeting? All these years have gone by. And here Joseph is racing in the royal chariot of Egypt to meet this group of his family with all the animals and the farm stuff, moving slowly toward the land of Goshen. By the way, land of Goshen. Does anyone know where the land of Goshen in that part of the world is in Egypt? Land of Goshen was the delta area. That was the farthest north towards the Mediterranean Sea, where they had the best potential for grass, for livestock to eat. It was considered the best of the land. And isn't it interesting that Joseph had the foresight to ask for the land of Goshen and to keep his family separate from Egypt? They were separate. They were not blended in. After 200 or 300 years, you would have expected maybe a little more blending of the society. It was largely still separate. And they even went to the point, whenever he brought them in before, he coached his brother. When we get to Pharaoh, here's some things I want you to do. Have you ever done that when there's some important meeting? You'll coach the people so that they say the right things when they get in the presence of someone that can make a decision. That's a typical thing that still happens. Human nature. We do that. I'm gonna think right now. I looked at Lewis here and I realized, Lewis, how many times have you talked to your clients and your witnesses in a court of law to make sure they're coached?
If we didn't, then it'd be malpractice.
Okay. All right. If you don't coach them, it's malpractice. All right. So in other words, Joseph coaches. He takes 5 of his brothers. I wonder how he chose the 5. That was something that the Bible does not tell us. He takes them and he says, you tell them that you are shepherds and keepers of the livestock. And he will give you, and he's trying to set the family up to have a nice piece of property and have a place to grow. And it's interesting that he could have brought them down and said, I'm going to just take care of them. The tax revenues will pay these guys. They're going to get all the food they need and everything that they need and taken care of. But no, Pharaoh asks in chapter 47, said, what is your occupation? What's your occupation? They're not going to be ministers in the government, even though Joseph has saved the nation of Egypt. It would have been normal for him to ask for some kind of, payback with his brothers. Yeah, Buzz, I think you're right. Keeping it separate was a big deal. God wanted to have his people there to survive, but he wanted to keep them separate. Okay, there's no question. But here's part of the reason why this happens. Number one, if you look at the structures, in every society there are certain strata, okay? You'll say, this is a high strata, everybody kind of ranks themselves, or others rank people in a kind of a strata. And so here he's saying, make sure you let them know that you are herdsmen and take care of livestock. But then it goes on to say, I'm not, there's so much material, I'm not getting the verse right in front of me, but that the Egyptians loathed shepherds. They didn't like it. So there's a natural barrier, and Joseph was happy to have that be the case, so there'd be a barrier. And I think he knew, having lived in the world of Egypt, all of the moral corruption, the temptation, the challenge, and he could see that their people would be blended into that society. And so he arranges it and sets it up so that there is a clear boundary. And I want to tell you today that with God's people, even though we live in a culture, in a society, we are to be separate and unique because we are his and not the world's. Kevin. Okay, verse 30. Yeah. I think it's very clear. In fact, I had that distinct impression reading that no question, Pharaoh actually entrusted his shepherding. In fact, I think I had that distinct impression as well. Yes, sir. In the cities. Well, I tell you what, if there's ever a time to follow the counsel that we have to be out of the cities, it's now. And if you're out of the cities, especially in Southern California and in most places around, you can grow a little garden. You can do some simple agricultural things. Last night we picked apples. Yesterday afternoon we picked apples from our apple tree. And there's no question you can do that. Kevin, go ahead. Yes, see, Pharaoh made the brothers of Joseph the rulers over his own cattle. So during the time where the famine gets worse and worse and worse, you actually have the children of Israel taking care of all of the nation's livestock. Isn't that an interesting thought? So that's the dynamic that we have going on here. And as I'm looking at this, that's a very important concept. Okay, there was here we have in that very first part. Okay, following God's leading, Joseph sets the family up in the best of the land to be able to accomplish what God wants to have done. Yeah. Yeah. Can you imagine how, and I keep thinking, I know that Buzz, usually y'all can hear Buzz, and I'm sorry for online if I haven't been repeating. I have not done that. I have to make sure I do that. But it's true that at this point in time, the family is very dependent on Joseph. In fact, it says that he provided the rations for them. He gets them the place to live. He gets them a job as their occupation of taking care of livestock. So and you're right, that is the fulfillment of the dreams that God gave to him when he was only 15, 16 years old. That's right. No. And the whole concept of, because the dreams, as Kevin points out, indicated not only the 11 brothers, but the mother and father would as well, which signifies the whole family. And honestly, the whole family is dependent on Joseph now. They are. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's true. God used the symbolism of sheaves in a harvest bowing down, which was food. And now they're in a situation where there's a famine. And I don't know, you can't have ignored the news over the last few months that we're expecting a world food shortage and famine may come upon us, which we've never dealt with in our short lives. Never had that happen. But that's almost certainly on the horizon for us. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay, agree. Yeah, and water as well. But here's the thing. The words "do not fear" come at several strategic points in today's lesson. One of them was God saying it to Joseph, saying to his brothers, "Do not fear." Okay, if you're afraid, what is that telling you? Okay, no trust. But then you say, what are you afraid of? If you're afraid, what are you afraid of? Isn't it always it's something that might happen in the future from now, whether it's 2 minutes from now or 2 years from now? Fear has to do with what might happen in the future. All right? And here the thing is, do not fear. And I think the concept that I want to make sure you realize, and that I realized as I studied this, there was a spiritual destiny for these 70 people that went down to Egypt. And not only were they to become a nation there, but they were also to spread the knowledge of God among the people that they were mingling with, which actually turned the other direction over several hundred years. They were so good at their occupation of taking care of things, and they became slaves, and they actually became the horsepower to run the nation of Egypt. So it became hard, and the devil was attempting to thwart God's plan at every stage. Okay? The second major point I look from this lesson are the blessings. Okay? And I want to look at the blessings. Okay? Whenever you have blessings taking place, when you say bless this, bless that, and I want to take into chapter 47, and I want someone to read verses 7 through 10. Okay? Need a reader, verses 7 through 10. And while some of the rest of you are getting ready, Delane, go ahead and read that for us if you would.
Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh.
Okay. Notice that Joseph brings his father Jacob, or Israel, to an audience with Pharaoh. Now, normally, the king of the host nation would be seen as the top guy in the strata. And we're talking about positioning. But here, Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Now, the blessing is, may God bless you, may he keep you, and so on. A blessing was something that included, as we know from Jacob and Esau, the birthright. Blessings are things that are beneficial from a large perspective. It can be small things, it can be large things, but a blessing is something that is beneficial to someone. In this context, beneficial spiritually in a big way. But Jacob blesses Pharaoh. But notice what Pharaoh says. He sees this old man in front of him that has to have help to get there because he still is limping. Do you remember? Whenever the angel touched his hip and pulled it out of joint, it never was put back in. He walked the rest of his life with that hip joint not working right, to remind him, I suppose, of his dependence on God and not himself. So here this man is, And so Pharaoh asks them, how old are you? Now, I'll tell you what, that's a question that sometimes people don't appreciate having asked. I don't know if, and of course today, and by the way, tomorrow we are celebrating, we have a birthday party on Sunday here for Betsy Phillips, who's not here yet today, but Betsy was 105 last month, and the church is having a birthday party for her, and we're very excited about that. When you get to be 105 years old and you're still as in a good shape as she is. But, for years, Betsy would be insulted if you asked her how old she was. She said, I don't want people to, you don't need to know. She was just she said, I don't want people to think I'm old. And then one day, Joe and I had a little fun with her, and we said, well, Betsy, we can go on the internet and find out exactly the day you were born. Don't you know that? Oh, she was unhappy. Joe. That's right. That's right. And Joe points out that since she hit the 100 mark, and we had the big party for her here, now she is accelerating that and relishing the idea that she has attained this age. But go ahead, Kevin. Oh, I will. I will be interviewing Betsy. We're going to have a lot of fun. You want to be here if you can. We're going to have a lot of fun with Betsy tomorrow. But in any event, I use that as an illustration to say, Pharaoh says, just how old are you anyway? And I thought that answer that he gave was very insightful. Now realize that Jacob is the last of what is known in the Bible as the patriarchs. Okay? The patriarchs that start with Adam and come right on down. Jacob is the last of that era. There's a transition happening here between the patriarchal period and now what they call prophets and kings. And there's the tribe, the sons, the descendants go forward. But notice what it says in verse 9. In his response to Pharaoh when asked how old he is, he says, the days of the years of my pilgrimage or sojourning, my life, are 130 years. Now, 130 years seems old to us now, but at that time, he was just coming off of a time. In fact, Shem, the son of Noah, lived what, 600 years? 600 years. He was still alive when Sarah died. Sarah died before Shem. So we're just a generation or two away from the age, long age periods where they didn't look old, didn't get old, but they just lived a long time. But he says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Now, when you're 130 years old and you say, few and evil have been the days of my life, what must his experience have been? Now, we have little clues along the way. Deception, the struggle of being getting his family started, ending up with 4 wives instead of 1. Yeah, Laban. I mean, it was obviously a challenge, but he says, and he says, the years of my life have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers. So he's saying it's been evil and rough. And I can only imagine as they're sitting there looking at the dynamic. Here's Joseph, still in the prime of his vigor in his life. Here's the old father presented before Pharaoh. I can just only imagine that dynamic. Ah, sure. And it was he was 30 at the beginning of the 7 years of plenty. So he would have been, I calculated 22 years. He would have had 22 years if I read that correctly. 17 to 30 is 13 plus 9, because there were 7 to the beginning of the famine, and he doesn't get this he doesn't come to Egypt until 2 years into the famine. So as Kevin points out, for you who might not have heard this, he was saying that part of the evil was his anguish over having lost Joseph for all those years. So you can imagine, here he is saying, my life is not like the lives of my father. I wonder if he ever thought, because he said that, I wondered if he ever thought what life would be like for his descendants. Don't we do that sometimes? Whenever you have your kids and your grandkids, I know I do, I wonder what life is going to be like for them. I say, Lord, bless them, protect them, keep them. And that's the beauty of God being involved. He knew that they were in God's hands. Okay. Well, he is. He realizes that he is bringing God's blessing and being the channel that puts the blessing on them. That's correct. Yeah. Look at the progression. And as Kevin points out, Abraham lives 175 years. Isaac lives 180, I believe. Jacob lives 147. Joseph only lives 110. So the progression is coming down as they go, right through through 4 generations. 4 generations you have that. So there is a transition happening, and I just want to say something else on transitions for a moment. I personally believe that we are in the midst of a major transition right now, spiritually, in our world. We've come through a time of great plenty, and our mission works have gone, the church has gone and has grown in very large ways. We are now coming into these last moments before the Lord comes. Even if it takes another 10 or 15 years, okay, and I said that even if, it could be 3 years. It could be 5 years. I don't know. But you look at the length of time, 6,000 years, and you've got just a short variation of a few years here at the end of time. If we were comparing this to a basketball game or to a football game, which I shouldn't even do that, but I only do it for this purpose, there's a 2-minute drill at the end of the game. Have you ever seen that? Okay, we're now in sudden death. What you do now is going to bring it all. We're in the last moments. The game has mostly been played. We're down here at the end of the experiment with sin. I shouldn't say experiment, the experience with sin that the universe has. We're almost there. So I just want to say we're in that transitionary period now, in my opinion. And that's right. Last Saturday night, some of you were not able to come. We actually had a Vespers here, and we played the video of Elder Wilson's sermon from the week before at the general conference session where Karen and I were. And his sermon was, hold fast what you have. And that's absolutely, as we go into this transitionary period, it is critical for us to have something we can hold fast to and then not let loose of it. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay. Question was asked, was there a type of population control in those days? And that's an interesting question. I think that there was a little later when Pharaoh was going to kill all the male babies. Okay? To keep them from overtaking the whole community. So there's nothing new under the sun. Okay? There's nothing new under the sun. And honestly, when you stop and think about the Roe v. Wade situation, and by the way, that reversal yesterday, even though it undid something that has been 49, almost 50 years in place, it does not make abortion illegal in this country. It only says every state has the opportunity to decide how they want to handle it. Which, incidentally, that's another fulfillment of prophecy in my mind, because we know that as we get closer and closer to the end, there's going to be a divide, and they're going to be going into 2 camps. Do you see it forming up? Where there's been all these little variations all around. Now you're coming down to 2. And it further divides those 2 than ever before. Okay? So we're in that. So I just want to say, I believe we're in that transition time, in our times we're living in right this moment. Now the blessings. I want to look and make sure, because I made some extra notes today because there's material here I want to cover. I want to get covered. Boy, I'm almost done. My goodness. Okay. I want to go to the blessings, some further blessings. And I want to go to chapter 49 or 48. Jacob blesses his two grandsons. Now, this is a little out of the ordinary because the blessing is also tied to the inheritance. There's an inheritance that happens whenever you're a part of a family because you belong to that family. And the way it worked back in this time was however many children you had, and actually, children, I may not have this exactly right. I'm not sure where the girls fit in with the boys. I think the girls were the responsibility of the boys, and I think that it was divided among the sons. But the firstborn son got a two portion. So in other words, if you had 6 kids, you would divide it up 7 ways, and the oldest got 2, and the rest of them got 1. That was the biblical way. Well, here you have another fulfillment of the dreams that Joseph had, where they all bowed down to him, because what his brothers had been trying to prevent was Joseph being made the heir and the one that received the blessing. And notice what happens in 48, okay? And I'm just going to summarize this because of our time. Joseph brings his 2 sons to see their grandfather, Ephraim and Manasseh. And basically what Jacob does is he blesses these boys and says, I'm going to take your 2 sons and I'm going to put them on an equal level with all of your brothers, Joseph. So in other words, you're going to get the double blessing. Your 2 sons are going to each receive a full blessing. Now that was in place of Joseph. Joseph, you notice there's not a tribe of Joseph. When you go through the look of the tribes, there's no Joseph. He was in the ruler position. He was in that role, but his 2 sons were brought in. Kevin. Yes. Yes. There were not 13 tribes. There were only 12 tribes, so they were considered a half tribe. Then, okay, so he blesses them, and it's interesting that Jacob actually blesses one of his sons over the other one. Now, it's interesting. Jacob was the one that had been the younger and wasn't supposed to get the blessing with Esau, and now when he's there to bless, he moves his hands opposite, and Joseph says, no, Father, you got him wrong. This one is the oldest. He said, I know my son, but this is the one that God is going to bless. So that tells you that God is working, and he knows the future is going to happen. Oh, Joseph does. He doesn't like it, but God knows. Again, this is the point. Even in transitions like we're in everyday life, remember that you only think you know what's going to happen tomorrow. God knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's why I am praying every day. It was reinforced in my mind when I was at the General Conference, and on the way home in the plane, I read the book by Pavel Goya, the new book that he just came out with. And his main point in that book was, you pray according to God's will for you, not your own. When you are praying and you say, Lord, I really need this. Would you please answer this prayer? He knows whether you should have it or not. And if we come into harmony with him, we're going to be praying and saying, God, your will be done in my life. Take me and use me in your purposes, not mine. Don't let me usurp what would be best. Okay, so he blesses the sons, these boys, and brings them into the fold. And so again, the fulfillment of the dream. Joseph is receiving the birthright blessing. All right. However, in chapter 49, which I'm only going to refer to one, now knows he's going to die, and he brings in and blesses all of his sons. Now, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to read all these because we don't have time. And if you do read them, you're going to say, man, is that a blessing? Some of those boys didn't get a blessing. I mean, it was, to be told you're unstable as water. Woo. So in other words, he was prophesying as he is blessing. God, the Spirit of God is on him. But Judah, his son Judah, I want to read that passage and the blessing of Judah. That's verses 8 through 12. And I'm looking for someone to read that online for me. 49, 8 through 12. Okay, I don't have too much time to wait, so I need someone quickly.
I got it here.
Okay, go ahead, thank you.
Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the people, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk.
Okay, now I'm not going to take time to try to unpack this whole passage, but I want to zero in on the key thing, okay? This is where the whole thing, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Have you heard that phrase? The Lion of the tribe of Judah. Judah is given in the blessing from his father the representation of being a lion. Okay, a lion is the king of beasts. He also says, the prophetic piece of this is verse 10. Okay, I want to reinforce that. The scepter is a symbol of kingship. That's the little short gold rod that a king anciently would. When he touched something with that was a symbol of his power. Okay? And it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. Who's Shiloh? That is the prophecy of the Messiah. That's Jesus, the Messiah coming. And he shall be in obedience to his people. And then it goes on to talk about, notice the donkey is brought in here. Did you notice that a little later, when Jesus is coming into Jerusalem, he rides on a donkey? See, again, this is the passage where we see Jesus coming in. Now, they didn't understand that then. They couldn't get that, but Judah was the one chosen to be able to do that. Powerful, powerful concept. And I love the fact that in these Old Testament stories, we again have salvation and the gospel being brought in again and again. The other thing that he's hoping will happen is he's hoping, the whole lesson is that God will turn evil and turn it into good. Has that happened in Joseph's life? Again and again and again. Has it happened in Jacob's life? Has it even happened in the brothers' lives? They were the ones that committed the evil. In the end, under the watch care and support of their brother who they thought they were killing or putting into slavery. So God took every one of those circumstances that were evil and turned them into good. And I just want to point out that we have that same privilege. If there is evil in our world that we're experiencing the result of, if evil is there in some way hitting us, God specializes in taking evil and turning it to good. Powerful concept. Okay. Now, the other thing that this lesson gets into, and I'm just going to hit these points because they're going to ring that. At 10:25. Whew. I was racing for the next 2 minutes. Okay, so I've got this. Thank you, Buzz. Buzz just created time for this. Is wonderful. Okay. The Messiah, the promise of the Messiah is right here. The next major element that I want to cover in this lesson is the whole idea of the promised land. Okay? Promised land. These people had been promised the land of Canaan from Abraham on. Now they're down in Egypt. They're wanting to get back to that place. That's their whole plan. That's God's ultimate purpose for us, is to be back in Canaan. But is that really God's ultimate purpose for them? To be in Canaan? Well, they were to evangelize the world from that crossroads moment. But that was a typology. Okay, remember we've talked about typology before. A type is something that is a symbol. It's an event that happens in symbol that is representing something larger. The best example of that is the Passover Lamb. Okay, the Passover Lamb was slain, the blood put on the doorposts, but that was symbolic of Jesus coming to die. He was the true Lamb of God, the Passover Lamb. Type and antitype. Same thing is happening when you talk about wanting to go to the promised land. That is a symbol of the whole world and God's people getting to heaven of the real promised land. And that happens again in this passage as well. Go ahead, Kevin. That's right. Kevin, he makes a beautiful point. The land of Canaan was not a godly place. When they came to take it over, when God said, this is going to be your land, the evil that was there was so bad that he had to clean it all out. Same thing's going to happen. Where are we going to inherit? Where does God's people inherit? They inherit the earth. It says in the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, the meek shall inherit the earth. Do you want it like it is today? The earth made new. So just like he remodeled Canaan for them, he's going to remodel the whole world. There's beautiful, the symbology in the scripture is phenomenal. It will tell us all kinds of things pointing us to the eternal realities if we will just listen, if we'll just watch and listen. Now, the hope of the promised land. Okay, I had some things here. I moved. Our ultimate hope is in the new heaven and the new earth. But there's something else that strikes me when we get into chapter 50. You notice Jacob, what did he say when he first saw Joseph? Fell on his neck, and there had to be a real reunion. It said Joseph hung on and cried on his neck for a long time. I can imagine all the servants of Pharaoh and all of his servants and all the family. That had to be quite a spectacle. But what did he say as soon as he was done? He said, now I've seen your face, you are alive, I can die. Okay? There's a lot of stuff going on about death here. Okay? As we come to the end of Genesis, there's a lot of stuff about death. There is the death of Jacob, and he brings Joseph to him and he says, Joseph, promise me, do not bury me here in Egypt. Take me back up and bury me in the cave of Machpelah where Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and maybe others of the family were buried. They had a burial ground. He didn't want to be buried in Egypt. Now, was Egypt in their culture kind of set on stuff that was about death? Oh yeah, they were. From the minute the Pharaoh became Pharaoh, he is beginning to build a pyramid that he can have his remains put into so that he can actually go out of that in a special way as it's designed. The spirit can get out of this world. That's what that whole thing was. So their whole culture was totally mesmerized with the idea of getting through this life and getting to the next one in their misunderstanding. So in the context of that, go ahead. Yeah. 72, you missed that. Well, yeah, okay. I'm just almost finished. Quickly. He did. He said, that's right. The men are repented. Ah. That's a good point. Consequences, it's no question that, and this brother was saying, for those of you online who could not hear him, I even had a hard time hearing him. So he was saying that there is an issue of consequences. Even though these were repented men, the brothers, there were still the consequences. Okay? That's why it said unstable as water. That's why it talked about being like a snake and an adder and biting the horse's hooves. I mean, the things that were said is moo. I don't like that. Okay? I wouldn't want that said about me. But nevertheless, there are consequences. But when we are living in a relationship with Jesus Christ, we have nothing to fear because he has taken the consequence of death from us. And we have salvation because of it. Yep. That's right. The brothers are still, I mean, even though it's been 17 years since they got down there, okay, and it had been 22 years before that when they sold him into slavery. So what is that? 22 and 17. Somebody do the math for me. Is that, okay, how many? 37? Okay, for all those years, they're wearing this guilty conscience, and as soon as their father dies, they go to him and bow down again and say, we're your servants. And they're afraid he's going to take revenge on them. That's right. That's right. There's bookends. I saw the same thing this week. 17 years he had with his father before he was sold as a slave, and 17 years after, before his father died. What an awesome thing. Okay, now quickly, because I'm now in the land of the grace is about to end. Okay, all right, they're opening the doors. They're all I can see them ready. Okay, here's my main point. You have Jacob dies, and they take his bones and bury them. Joseph, when he dies, he was 56 years old when his father died. So he had another almost half of his life to go to 110. But he makes them swear that they will take his body back out when they go. He knows there's going to be a coming out of Egypt. He does not want his body put in a casket, if I can call it that, and put into a pyramid. He wants it to go back over here. Here's the point. You have, at the beginning of Genesis was creation, and the beauty of all the earth coming from the hand of God. All the story of how sin came in and we fell and all the consequences of that. And then you get down to the end of Genesis and we're talking about death. But with that death, there is incredible hope for the new resurrection, the new life that God is going to give. So the book of Genesis is actually a microcosm of the entire great controversy in the plan of salvation. That is what gives us our hope and our strength. Let's pray. Holy Father in heaven, I just want to thank you for your blessings, for the gracious way that you have dealt with Jacob and Joseph and all the brothers and everybody as we've studied Genesis. And now, Lord, as next week we begin a whole quarter looking at the whole issue of suffering in the Bible, I pray, Lord, that you would continue in our journey, blessing our minds and opening us, preparing us day by day, moment by moment, to be yours completely and to fulfill your destiny in our lives, just like these people fulfilled the destiny you had for them. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, God bless. All of you online can unmute and say hello to the people here in the audience and to each other.
Happy Sabbath.
I have one. Yeah, thank you. Happy Sabbath and blessings, everyone.